Hey everybody, are you feeling groovy? Ann, are you feeling groovy? Are you feeling way out there?
Totally cool.
Totally cool? I don't know if totally cool is from the 70s, but peace, love, and all that kind of stuff. We have a super duper fun show for you today. Super duper, I think that might be from the 70s. Yeah,
What?
maybe? Super duper?
No.
No? No? Anyway, well, okay, bear with us because we're going to be a little bit corny today because we are reliving the 70s, which, yes, I grew up in the 70s. I'm totally dating myself. I did. And, well, good. I feel better. So did Ann. So did our director, Greg. No, Abby, our producer, wasn't even born yet, and she has to rub it in all the time. But anyway, we are going to have a ton of fun today. We are doing a baked mac and cheese with those crispy French fried onions over the top. Remember those from the 70s? Oh, yeah. So good. We're also doing a new twist on deviled eggs. We're doing Jell-O. We're doing Jell-O. And we're going to start the show with a recipe that's near and dear to my heart. And it's a recipe that I actually thought I'd never have. I thought I'd never, be able to taste it again or make it again. And I'm going to try and get through this, so bear with me. It is my Nana's lemon meringue pie recipe. And Nana lived with us. She was my great-grandmother. So you hear me talk about, a lot of times you'll talk about my grandmother Mimi, who was quite the gourmet cook and loved to entertain. Well, her mother, Nana, was completely opposite in the fact that she loved more like the home cooking. She was the oldest of 11 children. Her name was Anna Olsen, and her father and mother came over from Norway. And actually, this is so crazy because I'm not from Wisconsin, but it's home now, and it's where I've raised my kids, and I've been here for 20-some years, went to college at Marquette, and pretty much stayed. But it's interesting how you go back in history, and I guess this is where I've meant to be, because my great-great-grandfather, Nana's father, actually was a lighthouse tender in Sheboygan, of all places, and all of his family lived in the Sheboygan-Kohler area. They were immigrants when they came over, so it's just a, wow, crazy world how it all turns out. But anyway, back to Nana and her pie. So Nana lived with us. She passed away at the age of 104, so I always tease Bob and say, I'm going to be around for a really long time, so get used to it. And hopefully that's true. But she loved to cook for people who stopped by at the last minute, and she loved to bring people a pie. And she'd get all excited when she would find out that, we were having people over for dinner, and she'd always make her lemon meringue pie. She was also known for her meatloaf and her pork chops, so a couple of her other recipes are in my book, because I had those recipes. I didn't have Nana's lemon meringue pie recipe. She passed away before anybody got a chance to write it down, or so I thought. So in my first cookbook, when I was, putting together one of Nana's recipes and talking about her in the cookbook, when the cookbook was released, I sent a copy to my aunt. And my aunt was going through the cookbook, and she was reading Nana's recipe for, I believe it was her meatloaf or her pork chops. And I mentioned how, I sure wish I would have gotten that lemon meringue pie recipe. And sure enough, she called me right away and said, I have that pie recipe. Before she passed away, I sat down with her, and we wrote it all down. And I'm not sure if it still works. So I recently obtained the lemon meringue pie recipe because I was just craving it. I just wanted a piece of Nana's lemon meringue pie. So I got the recipe, and Ann and I went to work and we tested it out, and it worked perfectly. So really excited to share it with you on the show. So enough talk, sip my coffee, and we're going to get to work on this retro recipe, lemon meringue pie, which still will work perfectly and wow everybody today. Okay, so let's first talk about the pie crust. Nana a lot of times would make her own homemade pie crust recipe, and we didn't get the pie crust recipe, but sometimes I'd catch her using a pre-made pie crust. So I think that she would forgive me, and I'm not a big fan of making pie crust, just usually don't have the time for that. So we're going to pre-bake our pie crust. You can, just pick them up at the grocery store and line your pan with them, or if you have a wonderful homemade crust recipe, by all means, go for it. So put it in a nice pie plate and then bake it. Bake it until it's just golden. Poke it a little bit with a fork before you bake it, otherwise it'll bubble up on you. And bakes for about 8 to 12 minutes until it's just golden. So here's our pie crust already done. Now let's get to this magical filling of Nana's. So the filling recipe starts with 2 cups of water. a pinch of salt. This is 1/4 teaspoon of salt. 1 3/4 cup of sugar, just the regular white granulated sugar. And then we've got cornstarch, 1/4 cup of cornstarch, and 3 tablespoons of flour. So I'm going to get that all in a saucepan, whisk it really well, and we're going to cook this for about a minute. You just want it to boil. And I'm going to keep an eye on it. I've got my whisk here because we've got the cornstarch and the flour and all that. We really want to make sure it's whisked together well. We don't want any lumps in that wonderful lemon pie filling. Okay, now, Nana's pie was a little bit tart, and that is how I loved it. So we're going to do a 1/2 cup of fresh lemon juice. Sometimes it's a good idea to pop those lemons in the microwave, or those limes if they're ice cold right out of the fridge, which in this case they are. And that way you can really get the juices flowing. So we want quite a bit of lemon juice. And I'm going to do some lemon zest too. So we've got a 1/2 cup. I'll do some zest and some lemon juice. Back in the day, we didn't have one of these microplanes. Nana would have loved one of those. She used just the, box grater, and half of the zest would get stuck in there. So that's why we love, love, love this microplane. Checking on our filling here. Want it to boil and start to thicken. Okay, so a 1/2 cup of lemon juice. And we could always fish the seeds out. And it's so important to use fresh for this pie. There's not a lot of, this is an inexpensive pie to make. There's not a ton of ingredients, so the fresh lemon juice really does the trick. If you're in a real bind and you don't want to hassle with fresh lemon juice, for sure get a good quality lemon juice. Bottled lemon juice I'm talking. But you really don't, it's so easy. It's just, we're talking about 2 lemons. It's pretty easy to juice your own lemons. Oop, this one's ice cold, so I'm going to get that in the microwave. Okay. Nana would always be so proud when she'd bring out this pie, and everybody loved it. She really was famous for it. So moral of the story, if you've got loved ones who are famous for a recipe and they're getting up there in age, get them to write it down. And sometimes maybe get in the kitchen with them and actually make it and write it down yourself, because that's what we were worried about, is when she translated, when Nana gave my Aunt Bridget the recipe, would it really work? And in this case it did, so it worked out perfectly. But when you know a recipe by heart, sometimes you just do it, and you don't really think about it, and you leave out some ingredients. It's got one little seed in there. Okay, so I'm waiting for this filling mixture to cook a little bit. I'm going to get to work on the eggs. The recipe calls for 4 eggs. We need 4 yolks and 4 whites. The whites are going to be for the meringue.
Put the whites in the little bowl.
Okay, Miss Ann. Miss Ann says put the whites in the little bowl. And don't make the mistake, sometimes you get so busy and you forget to save them. You definitely need the whites for this recipe. And if you have one of these fancy gadgets that separates them, cool. Nana didn't. She just did it like that. That's how she taught me to do it, so that's still how I do it today. Ooh, I don't want to break that egg. I don't want to get any yolk into the meringue, for sure. Okay, we did it! Yippee! Now I'm going to get started on the meringue, and I may have to hand it over to Ann. So I want this to boil. Now for my meringue, the 4 egg whites, sugar, about 1/4 cup of sugar, and then Nana's secret ingredient, cream of tartar. About a teaspoon of it? Oh, thanks, Ann. 1/2 teaspoon of cream of tartar. And this basically just helps get those that meringue nice and stiff. If you don't have it, it is not the end of the world. When we tested this recipe, we did not have cream of tartar. So I did some research on it, and what I found is you could just use a teeny bit of lemon juice or teeniest ever bit of vinegar, and that can help stabilize the meringue. Now we also have a little bit of ice in this bowl. Meringue can kind of take its good old time. So keeping those egg whites nice and cold and that cream of tartar really helps stiffen it up. And I'm going to hand this off to you. You want to come this way? So we really want nice stiff peaks. Okay, this filling is getting nice and thick. At this point, we're going to add our eggs and our lemon juice. So these are the 4 egg yolks. And there's a risk if I put those egg yolks straight up. See how this gets nice and thick, and you want it to get nice and thick like this. So there's a risk of putting the eggs right in there and scrambling those. So what I like to do is do a little bit, we're tempering the yolks. So we're heating them up a little bit. And then we can get them back into our hot mixture. This is when you got to be a little bit careful. And this is going to give this beautiful yellow color, this filling. Okay, perfect. So back onto the heat. In goes our lemon juice and our lemon zest, 1/2 cup. We like a tart lemon meringue pie. Oop, I got one little seed in there. We'll get that out of there. And then 1 tablespoon of butter. And then we're going to let this cook another few minutes. How's our meringues doing over there? Okay. So at home, pretend that this cooked for about 5 minutes. Stirring often, you don't want to burn that filling. And at this point, this gets poured into our pre-baked shell. Isn't it pretty? And then it's real important to let that filling cool. If you're in a hurry, throw it in the fridge, because we don't want to put that meringue on top of a warm pie. So here it is. That meringue is, you can kind of see it's set up there perfectly. Or I should say the lemon pie filling. I'm hoping the meringue is nice and stiff. We're getting there. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll take a break. And this takes its good old time. And you really want some nice stiff peaks. So when we come back, we'll finish up this meringue, put it on top, and then we throw it in the oven just to brown that meringue just a teeny bit. So don't go anywhere. We're going to finish up Nana's lemon meringue pie recipe when we come back, and lots more ideas, fun recipes, and groovy stuff from the 70s. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.